Welcome to the CFB SuperShow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, and joined by my co-host and good friend Jake Kucheck. It's feast week on the eve of Thanksgiving. We're doing our thing all day long for college basketball, but don't worry, lots of college football games to get through, and we even have a showdown slate on Thanksgiving that we can talk about a little bit if we want to, but mainly have a ton of games on Friday, ton of games on Saturday. And instead of doing the whole game by game thing, which would just be impossible, not impossible because we could do it, but we'd be here for like 4 hours if we did. We're going to go positionally this time and give you some quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers that we like instead. Before we get into it, just to rehash last week, a little bit of a funky one. Had some nice calls. You definitely hit on some things, but we're into this final week here of regular season conference championships coming up. We're in position to finish strong. Overall, how was your week, and how are you feeling about the games coming up?
Yeah, the trend continues with doing well on the night slate. Had a good amount of the right Texas A&M pieces, and that game absolutely went bonkers, and made up for a lackluster main slate. So who knows why it's been that way? But that's kind of been the pattern. And even though Ashton Johnson didn't get us like all the way there, it was still enough of a performance that he didn't kill your lineup. A couple 100 yards and a touchdown, ho hum. You expect more from the guy. What are we doing? But yeah, no, I'm excited to get back after it. And Thanksgiving time, man, like is there a time of year that is more synonymous with football? It's amazing.
Absolutely. Got the NFL games tomorrow, all kinds of goodness. Yeah, Genty, I mean, he's so good that his down games are like other people's career games. He's fallen too far off the pace to hit the Barry Sanders record unless Boise like makes a run through the playoff or something. But still, going to be a fantastic season for him. Over 2,000 yards.
That's an interesting point, right? Because like they would get potentially 3 playoff games, right? And
right.
So that makes things a little bit weird with records, because now there's like all these more games that people have to potentially get to records. So it'll be interesting if like people are like, oh, there's an asterisk there.
It muddies the waters with those records now, because like there are a lot more games. They count the bowl games. Now there's an opportunity for the playoffs. Like it definitely, it'd be like the regular season record compared to like total games. I don't know. It would still be impressive, but yeah, it's still like the Barry Sanders season. If you go back and like read up or watch clips from that, ridiculous. And yeah, the killer for me personally, because I did the whole like expensive running back lineup last week, which didn't do that bad really, except for Omarion Hampton, who just got like phased out of the game immediately. Very puzzling, and it was a performance that got Mac Brown fired. Good riddance, Mac. I don't know what the hell you were doing. We're already in territory now where players are probably going to start sitting. There's already people hitting the portal. I don't think Omarion Hampton will finish the season with North Carolina. I could be wrong, but I think that relationship is now over. All right, just to talk about what we got going on here, we have an 11-game main slate on Friday. There's also a 5-game afternoon. That is like the tail end of the main slate. And then there's a unique 3-game night slate. Saturday has the 12-game main slate, a 8-game night slate, which you typically cover, and then there will be a 3-game late night. Those are all unique game sets, so a ton going on. We're going to focus primarily on the Friday 11-gamer and the Saturday 12-gamer. Again, we're not going to go game by game because, I mean, Jesus, that's 20-plus games. Like I said, we could do it, but it's just a lot of work here. We're going to go through quarterbacks first. We're going to talk about some of our favorites. And we'll start with the Friday slate, go through all the quarterbacks that we like, go through all the running backs, wide receivers, kind of give a core for that, and then move on to Saturday. And at the very end, we'll kind of have some prize picks at betting opportunities, and then we'll get out of here because I still have a lot to do. And I know you had all day at the most fun, happiest place in the world, and you're probably tired like I am, although for different reasons. All right, let's get into this one here. The Friday 11-game slate, Black Friday. There's some really intriguing games here. looking at it overall, like Navy, ECU, Oklahoma State is facing Colorado, but Colorado doesn't have a running back to take advantage of it. Got Genty facing an Oregon State rushing defense. That's awful. We have some MAC action. There's all kinds of good stuff here. San Jose State, my man Nick Nash. We got some Sun Belt, a myriad and a mixed box here for we got something for everyone on this slate. But why don't you start us off and talk about some of the quarterbacks that you're kind of zooming in here on this first look?
Yeah, man. So gonna jump, right into it with the one of the most expensive quarterbacks. I guess not the most expensive quarterback, but certainly up there. Is this the last time we see Shedeur Sanders play college football? Maybe it's not soon enough to be done with that whole scene, but it is potentially, obviously they're not a playoff team. They are a bowl team, but if it is not a playoff game, I don't necessarily see him being a guy that would go out of his way to play in a bowl game with the, media hype and the team around him that he's built. I see him, protecting his image and being a guy that kind of gets ready for the draft in other ways. That said, this is a regular season still. Last chance to put a lasting memory in the minds of the NFL teams that are going to draft him. I think we see a career best performance from Shedeur in every sense of the word. I think we see him throw it 50 times because why not? I think we see him throw for 400 yards. I think we see him throw 5 touchdowns. Yes, Oklahoma State is primarily a team you want to attack via the run, but it's not like you can't attack them via the pass either. It's you could do what you want against Oklahoma State. They'll let you do it. And I think there's too much talent here, and especially coming off of, the loss against Kansas, the perception of, this Colorado team has to a degree always been kind of smoke and mirrors, and they beat up on the poorer teams and they struggle against the good teams. This is a chance for him to beat up on somebody. And I think Shedeur knows that. And I think Deion Sanders knows that. And I think Travis Hunter knows that. I think there is an opportunity to run up the score and pad the stats, and they will take every advantage of it because that's exactly what this family and program is all about. So I don't have to like it to go ahead and roster Shedeur. And I think we're going to see a fantastic statistical performance from him that might not be overly necessary to win the game. He's going to leave it all on the field. So that's my rant on the high end of quarterbacks. I will also give you some options that are a little bit more affordable because he is pretty expensive up there at 9.2. We will go all the way down to Bryson Barnes at 6'3", who, for whatever reason, Utah State hasn't started most of the season. They had Spencer Petras transfer in from Iowa, and if you have followed Spencer Petras throughout his collegiate career, he was not a guy you were falling over yourself to roster in DFS necessarily. Bryson Barnes, on the other hand, absolutely bonkers against a team that's not exactly a pushover in San Diego State, and did it not primarily on the ground, but his work on the ground was exemplary. 15 carries for 193 yards and a touchdown on the ground, to go along with 13 passes complete for 139 yards, but 3 touchdowns. And this is against a decent San Diego State defense. So if we get confirmation that Bryson Barnes is the starter and his game is towards the end of the slate. It's one of the 3:30 Eastern kicks. So you will have to leave a super flex spot open for Bryson Barnes in case there is a ruling that goes the way that we don't want it to go. But there's another pivot that we'll get to in a second if that doesn't work out for us and doesn't go the way that we want. But definitely a guy that I'm going to be prioritizing against Colorado State. They've been a defense that we've been able to attack pretty much all season, and that is a 58.5 total with a 6-point spread. So a very juicy DFS game all the way around. And if we can get Bryson Barnes confirmed as the starter in that one, I think he has the opportunity to go pretty bonkers. Then if we don't, there's a pretty easy pivot in Walker Eget, who I like independent of Bryson Barnes, but also, as a contingency plan, if we get the Spencer Petras is good to go and going to give it a go and dressed out, and we have to worry about Spencer Petras potentially being a starter in that one, we can go to Walker Eget instead at 6,200. Had a clunker against UNLV. There is no other way to describe it than that. I was watching that game closely. I was doing pretty well in whatever contests I was in, leading into having Walker Eget and I think Justin Lockhart was the receiver that I was using with him. And it was a weather game, and they could not get on the same page, and they could not get past the weather. And they did nothing close to what they did against Boise State the previous week. And so it was kind of a shame to see them not be able to connect the way that we've seen them do in previous weeks. And, even though we know that Walker Eget has some talent, the weather was just too much to overcome, but should have an ample opportunity to correct that ship and right that ship and get things going against the Stanford secondary that we've been attacking all season. Stanford is the Michigan State of years past, the pass defense that we attack regardless of circumstance. And hopefully, whether or otherwise, Walker Eget can get it going with Nick Nash and Justin Lockhart and make some magic happen at only 6'2". So whether you want to use him in combination with Bryson Barnes or as a hedge if Bryson Barnes can't go or isn't going, that it's a great play. And at only 6'2", helps you afford Shedeur if you're choosing to go that route as well.
Yeah, there's some pretty darn good quarterbacks at a reasonable price here. Love the Ege call, especially with some of the receivers there. Looking at the MAC, there is a Ohio versus Ball State game here. Parker Navarro at this weird price of 8.3, which will probably get a little bit ignored there because you can go up for a little bit more, get Shedeur or pay down. But this is a great spot for him against Ball State. Ball State is giving up over 160 yards per game on the ground and over 286 through the air. It's been the team in the MAC to really pick on. Parker's had some really nice games back-to-back over 100 yards rushing against EMU and a pretty tough Toledo defense, which they scored 24 against and held them to 7. And there's certain games where he'll throw for 300 and rush for 100, and I think this is definitely one of them. We could see a potential 50 out of Parker, and ownership-wise, I don't think he even sees close to 10 to 15%. So that's the one that stuck out to me. I also like for GBP looks because Navy, ball control stuff. But Kattenhauser's there at 6'6" as well. So you have another quarterback in that sub 7K range. He's been pretty steady. He had that monster, massive game against FAU, threw for 343 yards, 5 touchdowns. He also rushed for 52 and a touchdown there. He had a nice string of games, granted against Temple, FAU, but against another Service Academy team, an Army, in which they gave up 45, but he still put up a huge game of 31.5 fantasy points, 282 yards passing, and he scored 4 times through the air and 1 on the ground. Navy is not as good as Army, and they were looking pretty good, but once they got throttled, smacked, whatever you want to say, against Notre Dame, they've kind of been reeling ever since. Blake Horvath is dealing with some back/side issues. They got blanked by Tulane, my Tulane boys who are playing tomorrow, 35-0. They lost a really odd game to Rice, came back and beat South Florida in a game that they didn't look good in, and they've just been reeling ever since that Notre Dame loss. So I do think ECU is live to win this game, and Hauser is another guy who's probably going to get a little bit overlooked where his price is, considering that Agate is such a great spot there, and depending on that Utah State quarterback situation, like you said. So those are the two that really kind of stand out. There is the Sun Belt quarterback in Jordan McLeod at 8-9, probably more of a luxury play, but he's going to get 40-plus passes here in against the South Alabama team. I'm actually really excited about this game from a betting and watching standpoint, but DFS wise, McLeod's probably priced about where you would expect, but a lot of different options here from high end to low end and just different types of game. I love how this is all mixed up with mid majors and mid majors basketball lately, G5 and P5 and all that good stuff. So this is going to be a really fun slate. All right, let's move over to the running back position. Now, there is a ton of pay-up running backs on the Saturday slate. Very contrasting. Of course, you have the highest one on this slate, but then you have a ton of guys under 7K who are looking kind of reasonable in terms of actual options. Why don't you break down for us, your top options and some of the other ones that you're looking at here at the running back spot?
So if you read the Saturday late slate article, I was referring to Ashton Jeanty as Bitcoin. He's just so valuable, and we don't even really understand it anymore. Like the price doesn't matter. You know exactly what you're getting. 169 yards and a touchdown, being maybe his worst game of the season. I guess there's a blowout against Portland State where he only got 11 carries. But in a game that he saw somewhat approaching his normal workload, he didn't quite get there with the touchdowns. And it was just overall like not a super high scoring game, 17-13. Like just it's hard to score a lot of fantasy points in a 17-13 game. And I don't know really what the reason for that was. Early in that one, it was either late first quarter or early second quarter. He busted like a 70-yard or 60-yard run or something like that. And you go, okay, he's off to the races. We're going to see him do that 3 or 4 more times. And then they just kind of shut it down. Like you didn't have the same opportunity or explosiveness that we've seen in the past. I don't know that means he's getting tired. I think that was just, hey, like, everybody knows it's coming now. There's 9-man boxes, and it's hard, even against Wyoming, to hit a 9-man box and make them pay. At 14-3, like he continues to be the most expensive back we've ever seen, most expensive guy in any DFS sport that I've ever seen. I don't know. Do you concur? Do you remember anybody over 14-3 at any position?
Not on DraftKings. Not that I remember on DraftKings. No.
Yeah, it's crazy. The first decision point is to Jeanty or to not Jeanty. Look, I'm never going to tell you to full fade the guy. The price is ginormous. So if you want to make some lineups with him and some without, just so you can have exposure both ways, that is not a bad way to go. I don't have a particular stand on that. Let's talk about some more affordable running backs. If we get all the way down to Liberty, we get some pretty high usage from Quentin Cooley. 20-plus carries in each of the last 4 games, all of which were in conference. Well, 3 of the 4 were in conference play. And over 100 yards and at least a touchdown, and in 2 cases, multiple touchdowns in all of those games, including his most recent game, 24, 166, and 2 against what is typically considered a pretty decent team in Western Kentucky. At 6'9", Quentin Cooley is probably one of the best plays on the slate for me. You're getting 80% of what you would project Jeanty to do at less than 50% of the price. It's a very compelling play in a matchup that he should absolutely smash in Sam Houston State. And it fits with what Liberty wants to do. They want to run the ball, whether it's with him or with the quarterback Salter. They just running the ball is their identity. And so really good place to go there. I like him quite a bit. In that same ECU game, we talked about Kattenhauser, who's seen some really big plays go for a lot of yardage and have explosive touchdowns. We've also seen some big games out of Rajai Harris, particularly recently. 18-1, 14-2 against Tulsa, and then 24-1, 28-3 against North Texas. Service Academy game, you are going to have to be explosive. You are going to have to score quickly against a team that likes to grind it out. But I think ECU also is going to be able to out-athlete Navy to a degree, and Rajai Harris is a big part of that. And at only 5,900, very affordable. And we've seen ECU run the ball more as the weather gets a little bit colder. And so I think there is some credence to that, and we should be in good shape to profit at that price point. And then the other scenario that we want to focus on, similar to the Bryson Barnes scenario at quarterback for Utah State, we want to watch the Colorado State in that same game. Actually, we want to watch the Colorado State running back room. Avery Morrow did play against Fresno, and he has traditionally been the back that gets more volume when it comes to the carries on the Colorado State backfield. But only 2 carries against Fresno State. He's got either some kind of injury or he pissed off a coach or something in the doghouse. Played, but only got 2 carries. And standing right there to take advantage was Justin Marshall, who got Morrow's typical workload of 20 carries, took that for 94 yards and a touchdown, and also caught a pass. Justin Marshall's at 4K. So if we get the word from the beats that, Avery Morrow doesn't look 100%, or Avery Morrow might only be, there to give moral support to the team, or Avery Morrow's dressed out but taking, third team snaps. If we get any of that kind of indication, Justin Marshall becomes a huge priority against a Utah State team that is one of the most attackable defenses in the country, right up there with the Oklahoma States of the world in terms of defenses you can attack against the run. And we would get a 20 carry running back against a terrible run defense for only 4K. Sign me up. So got to watch that situation. We got to make sure that what we think is going to happen is actually going to happen. But if it does, we're going to be in pretty good shape there. So those are the 3 that I'm focused on. We got the more expensive one, but still reasonable, Cooley. We got Rajai Harris at kind of a mid-price at 5.9, and then we've got Marshall at 4K if he's getting all of the work or the majority of the work.
Yeah, and with Marshall and maybe Barnes, we can think about getting to Genty there at the 14.3, huh?
It's true. Save that money, buy that Bitcoin.
So a couple of other running backs here. One that we kind of briefly spoke about earlier in private. We both love Fluff Bothwell, just a great name on South Bama. Super efficient. He's just not, for whatever reason, getting those carries because South Alabama is very content giving the ball to a myriad of different looks. And Gio Lopez, of course, also not as well lately, but does run the football to a degree. But they just refuse to put Kentrell Bullock to bed, and he's just kind of that grinded out guy, gets the touchdowns. McReynolds is gone. Like, we're not seeing any looks out of him. We're just continuing to see Bullock pilfer that work. Bothwell, to me, is the better runner. It's a little bit expensive at 6'3". You're probably not going to have much ownership, but if you're running multiple lineups, and why shouldn't you on Black Friday? What else are you going to be doing? Shopping or something? I've stopped doing that years ago. Hell with that. He's the type of guy, if he gets 15 to 20 touches in this one, he's going to blow the doors off of Texas State. Texas State's overall rush defense, it does look better than it actually is, but they've given up some big scores individually. There has been multiple 4 out of their last 500-yard rushers. The overall team rushing is below 200 that they're giving up. But when you look at it, there's one running back in particular every single game that Texas State plays that they are just getting absolutely mashed. So I do like the opportunity there. And we're not talking about Texas State facing who's who: Old Dominion, Louisiana Monroe, USM, Georgia State. They gave up almost 70 yards to Roddy Clark on USM. Roddy Clark hasn't been able to run for more than 40 yards like any point in the last 3 years, so that might as well be 100 for anyone else. So it kind of gives you an example here. This is a great DPP spot, but the touches, and you brought this up in our DMs, like, he might only get 6 carries, might only get 5 touches. Like, it's really tough. He had 6 last week, and he ran for 104 yards and a touchdown. Granted, one of those was on a 60-yard score. So home run hitter for sure. We saw earlier in the season when he would get like 17 carries, 18, puts up some big numbers, and he does have some pass catching ability. They're just underutilizing him, and he is a prime candidate to hit the transfer portal. The way that they're using him right now, I don't know why they're doing. You'd think they'd want to be like laying the red carpet out for him, especially in the transfer portal era. But some team in the the P4 area is going to offer him a big NIL payday, and he's going to be gone. So I do like him for GBPs for sure. Still have an affinity for Tyree Walker. He hasn't looked very good lately, but he's priced back down in a level where he's just such a really good buy low candidate at 5'8". Minnesota's rush defense hasn't been as good as it looks in statistically speaking. If you break it down and watch games, look at their actual individual matchups against upper tier running backs, they've really struggled. Nice thing about Walker is he gets relatively strong amount of touches. Last week they got blown out by Nebraska 44-25, so he got scripted out pretty fast, and he still had 14 carries. In a game where they're close or leading, he'll have 20 plus carries pretty easily. And 5'8", he's the type of guy that will just grind out 3 touchdowns here, and he hasn't scored in any of the last 3 games, but I do like him quite a bit as well as one of those kind of cheaper options that we can look at. And then I did want to mention Henry Parrish is out for the rest of the season for Ole Miss. That was another one. Like, we got dogged out on a couple of things last week, right? Omarion Hampton. And then the other thing, a chalky Ulysses Bentley just not playing at all. I don't know what Lane Train is playing at with his running back room, using an ineffective wide receiver who's never played running back since like high school. They're playing a very easy Mississippi State team, but I don't know what they're going to do at running back, but I'm about sick of Ole Miss, and I hope they lose, that we don't have to deal with them anymore. So I wanted to get that off my chest.
Anything about Bentley? Like, I've been following up on that and trying to find it, and like, there's just nothing. Like,
there's not. They didn't even. I guess they were directed not to talk about it in a presser, and like no one had the nuts to like ask about it. I guess they didn't think it was important.
Like, hey man, where's this guy who's clearly your best running back?
Yeah. Why are you using the WR9 as your RB1 and he's running backwards on every play? Like, I don't know what that was about. That was very strange. But yeah, that was, I don't know. That was a hard one. And then one last shout out to Ollie Gordon, who's priced at $9K. 3rd game in his last 5 going over 100 yards, facing off against a Colorado defense that just gave up 200 yards to Devin Neal. We know that they can be ran on, and to keep the ball out of Shador's hands, you're going to have to run. Ollie Gordon's not dead yet. Might be his last collegiate game as well, but don't write him off just yet. All right, let's talk about wide receivers. This slate has a million options. Nick Nash, who would have thought a year later, 10.1K. We're certainly not getting Nick Nash and Ashton Genty together, although I guess we could play a bunch of like sub 4K guys to get there. We have some really high-end options, expensive, a lot of them with injury designations as well, which is always kind of a tough situation. But who are some of the wide receivers / tight ends you might be looking at on this one?
Yeah. So because we can't really trust the South Alabama running game, or at least the production, we can't trust it to come from any one player. We do still want to get to that game. That is a very, very fantasy friendly game. 61 point total, 1 point spread. should be very competitive. And he's expensive, but with the savings that we're getting elsewhere, I think we can get to Jamal Pritchett. He's one of the more, if not the most consistent receiver in terms of, number of targets and number of catches. And he doesn't have to get the multiple touchdown game to get there because he's getting such high volume in the passing game, but he also is very capable of potentially getting that multiple touchdown game. They love going to him. There's not really a defense that can stop him, and Texas State certainly isn't one of those defenses. He is at 7,700, so he will, he does take some planning to get to in terms of, the salary, but I think it's well worth it. Anytime you can get a receiver that's more or less locked in for double-digit catches and 100 yards and potentially a score or two. I mean, that's a pretty good thing. And if you don't have to pay, $9K like you would for Travis Hunter, or 10K, double-digit or double figures, 5 figures, double digits, like you do for Nick Nash, you're getting a little bit of a discount to those premiums. I think you're in good shape there. So I do like Pritchett, very explosive player. Opposite end of the spectrum in terms of archetype and also some decent savings would be Trent Walker from Oregon State. And we've been on him several times this year. His price has generally been in like the mid 4K range. And so we do see an increase in price, but it's warranted. He went 12 for 136 yards against Washington State last week. And that was kind of predictable. And he was one of the guys that I was very interested in and used because he was at a pretty reasonable price point and getting the volume that he does against a Washington State team that gives up a lot of yards just always. So my thought on that, though, is if you are able to get enough savings to use a Genty lineup, using Trent Walker as a run back in your Genty lineup makes a lot of sense, right? They're, every 80-yard touchdown run for Genty means another Oregon State possession. And if the more of those you get equal 4 or 5 catches coming back for Trent Walker, you're in really good shape. That's about as efficient as that game could go for you, right? And so I like Trent Walker a lot in general. I like him even more in Genty lineups where you can find the savings elsewhere. And then another name to help you find those savings and also get additional Shedeur exposure without having to pay not just the massive premium for Travis Hunter, but also the increasing prices on Weister and Shepard, is a guy that's done pretty well each of the last 2 weeks. Hadn't been a factor prior to the Utah game, but Draylon Miller with 6 for 108 and a touchdown against Utah, followed up with 5 for 44 and a touchdown against Kansas. I don't know that this guy's just a flash in the pan guy anymore. I think, there might be something to it. And let's face it, Shedeur is going to be airing it out enough that everybody's going to have a chance, except for Jimmy Horn. I don't think we see much Jimmy Horn in this one. I don't even know if he's going to play. But even if he does play, he's just been completely out of the mix. It's been all Hunter, Weister, and Shepard up until this point, with Draylon Miller showing up in each of the last 2 weeks, and he's only at 3,800. So if we can get a 105 and 1 game at 3,800 out of him, it might even get you to a Shedeur and Genty and Trent Walker lineup with Draylon Miller in there too. And so you're just all kinds of correlated with, expensive guys paired with cheap guys. And it's just, it is DFS nirvana if all of that can hit at once. So I really like Draylon Miller quite a bit as well.
Yeah. Couple of players looking at here, and it's going to be tough to get to, but I had to just mention them. On Bowling Green side, Harold Fannin Jr., who does have a game time decision tag. He's 9K. He's well worth it, though, because he is just such a major factor in what they're going to be doing. The game projects to be a little bit cold. There could be some weather issues there, which means they'll likely run the ball out, right? But Fannin will rack up a lot of the short yardage stuff too, and they use him in a lot of their run blocking. But he's just the threat of him being on the field, and that just screams big PPR game. And basically this game shaken out between Bowling Green and Miami, Ohio is a win and you're into the MAC title game. Win and losing you're going to basically get ready for next year. He has just been an absolute monster. We always play him. He's super chalk on all the weekday slates. With all the high-priced options on this slate, he's going to get lost in the shuffle. The game time decision tag is going to scare a lot of people, the possible weather issues, but tournaments-wise, this is the type of player who can break it. And if he's going to be seeing -5%, sub 5% ownership, which is the first time that would ever happen when bowling's on the slate, it just is way too intriguing. And then the pairing options for your guy, I get, obviously Nick Nash is super expensive at 10-1, a little more realistic to get to Justin Lockhart. People will look at the logs and get worried, but he was targeted. You had mentioned they completed 4 passes in that game against UNLV. So it'd be amazing for anyone to have a catch in that. And so he had no catches on his 3 targets. Look for him to bounce back here. Stanford, a really terrible pass defense, as you had mentioned. So I do like Lockhart as the main option to get to. There are some cheaper options, guys like Trayshawn Hurry at 3-4 that are interesting if you need some value. And then, of course, running back some GPP stuff, Nick Nash, because how could I not have some exposure to my guy here? He's just been so damn good. But looking at those are the ones where I think GPP-wise you can get a leg up on the field, because I think most people are going to be looking to spend down at the receiver spot as much as possible. So what are you looking at for I know we went through that pretty quick, but what kind of core would you be looking at for that slate?
So I think I'm going to go with Shadur, Cooley, and Draylon Miller in the core. Big proponent of the Draylon Miller this week. I think that's probably not going to be the most popular thing, but if we get him at low ownership, that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. I love that for sure. For me, I'm going to go with Parker Navarro. I feel like this is a great spot for him. I really want to go with a cheaper quarterback, but Navarro I feel really safe with. As far as running backs go, I don't have a real big favorite in the core for this one. I feel like it's going to be one of those slates where I actually only play 3 running backs, which will be kind of a surprising. Right now, I'll say Tawi Walker, because at 5'8", that savings, it allows me a bunch, and then Justin Lockhart from San Jose State. I just want to be attacking Ball State and Stanford as much as possible through the pass. All right, we'll jump over to the Saturday slate, which has that crazy $25 entry tournament, $50,000 to first, the Turkey Hangover Special. Got to throw a few entries in there. It's a huge one, though, over 11,000 entries. That is a lot of damn people. But hey, if you solo ship that, it's a very fun day. All right, getting into that one, some of my favorites here at quarterback, Garrett Green. He was mega chalk 2 weeks in a row. Last week was a struggle up against UCF. They did win 31-28, but the running game was really going well. He had about 50 rushing yards. Both of his running backs, C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White, scored touchdowns, multiple in some cases. And the passing game just wasn't really needed. Losing, Bray is going to be more of a problem than maybe we thought. But he's only 7.6K. He's going up against a Texas Tech defense that should allow him to do what Baylor did when he put up those 44, when he rushed for 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, threw for 230 and 2 touchdowns. I'm definitely expecting him to get back into the 250-yard passing range, over 100 yards rushing against this Texas Tech defense. Garrett Green, I'd mentioned last week, I feel uneasy using Garrett Green because in these great spots, he's let us down, and he did, but this is an even better spot against Texas Tech, and the price should really be closer to 9K for what his expectations are and how he's played. So we're getting a really nice discount there on Garrett Green. And as a dual threat quarterback, it just seems like it would be a mistake not to have heavy exposure to him. Notre Dame is on the slate, so that means we have Riley Leonard under 9K at 8.7. He was 9.5 just a couple of weeks ago against Virginia. Going up against your Trojans, the USC, we know that their defense, it's fixed a little bit in the early part of the season, but it's not really fixed anymore. It's been a problem under the regime, and going forward, I think they're going to struggle to go out the rest of the season with stopping an offense like Notre Dame's. Riley Leonard has become so very good running this Irish offense. They just dirt napped Army after dirt napping a Navy, Virginia, FSU, just blowing the doors off of everyone. I think USC will have some success, but the Notre Dame defense is just playing so well, and he's just automatically going to score a touchdown on the ground, right? And he's throwing adequately enough now. One of those safe quarterback options. I would be using Riley if you're going to go with the one quarterback route, because this slate for running backs is absolutely loaded. I do feel safer with Leonard on his own than I do Green. A little more expensive, of course, but I just don't see Riley Leonard letting us down too often, especially in this spot where, again, on the road, USC should be able to keep this one competitive, I hope, which means Riley Leonard's going to do some things. And I saw something earlier on Twitter, one of the media is talking about, are we just giving them a mulligan for their NIU loss? And I all the teams that are falling out that have 2 losses, 3 losses, only one undefeated team left, and they're a major fraud, of course, Oregon. I think, you have to give them a quote-unquote mulligan because they have been blowing the doors off of everyone. They have had really just 2 competitive games since week 2. We're talking like 66-7 against Purdue, 49-7 against Stanford, 52-3 against FSU. Like, they're just blowing the doors off of every team. And, it looked like they were dead to rights. We all said no playoffs for them. Here we are 10 weeks later, 13 weeks later, and Notre Dame looks like a playoff team. And then the other quarterback in that same game against West Virginia, Baron Morton for Texas Tech. He was major chalk last week against Oklahoma State. He threw 50 times. We knew he was going to have 40 plus, 366 yards, 4 touchdowns. His price only went up. Actually, it went down 100 to 6.4K. So expect him to be heavy chalk again. That's a big underprice. He should be at least 7.4, 7.5. Great matchup. West Virginia's defense, it's better than Texas Tech's, but not by much. Both of the quarterbacks in this game, it's a major stacking opportunity. And then I wanted to mention the quarterback for Kentucky. It's going to be Cutter Boley, who is the min price at 4.5. The Brock Vandegrift experiment is just not working. They went back to him for a time there against Texas. Obviously, it ended up being a disaster. Vandegrift had a scholarship to Georgia at one point. I just want to point that out. But Boley there at 4.5. It's interesting. Louisville, they're pretty susceptible to the pass. Against Murray State in week 12, Boley looked pretty good, honestly. But, of course, that was Murray State. Texas was awful. 2 of 10 for 18, 160 yards. Sacked a million times, minus 57 rushing yards. But there is a lot of, I want to repeat this many times, a lot of pay-up running backs and premium elite backs that we can use. A quarterback against Louisville at 4.5K that can at least get us 15. He's already shown that. I mean, I'd take probably 10 to 12 from him at that point. But there's a lot of things you can do with a 4.5K quarterback there. And if he does anything over 20, you're probably going to be in bink territory there because of the pay-ups that you're going to get. Deep slate of running backs, which we're going to get into. But who are some of the quarterbacks on the Saturday slate that you like?
Yeah. So, kind of feel like I'm going back to my roots a little bit. Guys that I liked at the beginning of the season that haven't necessarily had the best seasons, but they're in decent matchups to turn those around, turn their season around, and on a solid note. So we'll start with Noah Fifita from Arizona. Obviously pretty big expectations for him coming into the season with T-Mac, and they were going to dominate, in the offense that they both knew so well. And haven't really seen that. We've seen that O-line get blown up. We've seen him not have any time to throw. And we haven't seen outside of, early on in non-con play. And, and then also, I guess, against West Virginia, we saw them explode a little bit too. But yeah, especially that first game of the season with T-Mac going for, what was it, like 200 yards and 4 touchdowns or whatever it was. We thought that it was just going to be the Fifita to T-Mac show all season. Haven't seen it happen. I think we see it happen on Saturday. I think this is, big rivalry game. big recruiting game, big, let's give T-Mac the ability to put one on tape. It's kind of similar to the Shador scenario. Put one on tape to end things on a good note and have a bunch of highlights for people to fawn over for several months before the NFL draft, and it's going to be Fafita throwing it to him. So I think we are going to see lots and lots of Fafita to T-Mac on Saturday, possibly rivaling that 10 catch, 304 yard, 4 touchdown game that T-Mac ended the season on. So Fafita, had a pretty good game that game too, right? And how could you not, with that being the line that your top receiver had, and so he finished that one with 422 and 4. That would be a heck of a get at 7-1, and so I think he'll probably be lower owned because of how poorly the season has gone, but this is an attackable defense any way you slice it, and also an offense that is able to put up plenty of points of their own and keep everything humming and play at a fast pace. So really like Fafita in this one. And then the other version of that's kind of similar, the Conquistador, Fernando Mendoza, gets a prime matchup against SMU. SMU has allowed a lot of points to teams that are not very good. Cal has shown that they are going to throw the ball whether they need to or not, but this is going to be a game in which they need to throw quite a bit. So against Wake, 56 pass attempts in a win. Against Syracuse, 34 pass attempts in a loss. Against Stanford, 36 pass attempts in a win. Coming off of 98 yards with my boys, right? Big win for the Conquistador against Stanford, against a defense that you should have good performances like that. But he's riding all kinds of confidence, just short of 303 against Stanford. He's only 6'8", and they're going to need to throw it quite a bit, chasing some points here. So like Mendoza and like Fafita in that kind of mid-tier price range, to help save some money to pay up for some running backs.
Oh, yeah. Getting over to the running back spot, again, there are some really expensive options. Let's see, 7 above 8K, which is wild, and most of them are very playable. Start off with Taj Brooks for me. Who else? I love Taj Brooks always. Priced at 9.9, 57 against Oklahoma State. Like any running back against Oklahoma State, we're never fading. He was like very chalky, as you'd imagine, but the fact that he wasn't like more than 40% in most contests was just like a real travesty. I mean, it was good for us, although Hampton screwed me anyways. But 133 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns. He also had a receiving touchdown. Going up against West Virginia, RJ Harvey just had a really massive game himself against West Virginia. Expect Taj Brooks to replicate that. The 9 receptions against Oklahoma State was a real surprise. We expect him to have 3 to 4 of those, but if he's going to be giving us 8 to 9, hell yeah, he's worth 9.9K, 1K more than he was last week. Overall, 1,300 yards rushing, 164 receiving. We've seen a lot of receiving in the last 3 weeks, though. Like that aspect of his game. I expect West Virginia to keep this close, and for this one to be a, game played in the 70s, possibly the 80s. Very minimal defense. We saw a 56-48 win for them last week. I think we see this into the 50s and 60s pretty easily for each team. So Brooks is the main pay up, and he's bookended by Dylan Sampson, Cam's your guy Cam, Devin Neal's up there. Like there's a lot of options, but he's definitely my number one. And then on the Notre Dame side, if you don't go Riley Leonard, I think Jeremiah Love's probably a must. He's priced at 7K now. Throughout the season, he was plagued with the fact that he was only getting, 9 to 10 carries. He'd score the touchdown, but Riley Leonard doing so much damage on the ground, and they still are giving other guys work that he just wasn't getting enough volume to really pay off. Now, lately in the last 4 or 5 games, he's been getting double-digit carries. He's been getting some receptions, and he's just scoring touchdowns at what you would think is an unsustainable rate, but he's been doing it for 13 weeks. Only 7 carries against Army, but 130 yards, 2 touchdowns, also caught a touchdown. He's been good for a minimum of 2 touchdowns or more in 3 of his last 4. He has scored at least 1 touchdown every single game. Just an absolute magnificent season for Jeremiah Love. I would have loved to have seen him get 25 to 30 touches at any point this season or regularly. But with Riley Leonard, that just wasn't going to happen. Now he's going up against USC. Again, their defense it gets hyped every year, as well as anyone. It just hasn't been up to par. Running backs have done a good job against them. The only hesitancy here would be, he's not getting enough touches like Fluff Bothwell, but he has proven he doesn't need a lot of touches to pay out. 12 for 102 against Navy with 2 touchdowns, 16 for 137 against Virginia. The one time he actually got a decent amount of volume, he goes for 137 and 2, and then the 7 for 130 and 3 against Army. So Jeremiah Love, more apt to probably get to him as I am for Riley Leonard, but I definitely think we need to get to one of them. And then the third running back that I'm really looking at, and I'm just like you, I'm like my guys, as I get guys, I just keep going back to them. Bryson Washington of Baylor, priced at 7.6. Now I mentioned there's 8 different running backs above 8K, but then we've got a tier in the 7Ks that are just as playable. And against Houston, he had 28 carries. They did win 20-10. A little bit of a disappointment, 113 yards. He didn't score any touchdowns and hit about 15, which at 7.5 wasn't quite enough after coming off back-to-back 50s for us against TCU and West Virginia. Kansas is a team riding high after knocking Colorado out of the Big 12 title game. Baylor has been on a really nice streak. They've looked pretty much unbeatable over their last 5 to 6 games, and a lot of that is because they've been turning it over to their running game with Washington. He's performing like a 9K, 10K back. We know he is going to get the volume, 30 touches, whether that's through targets or carries, and he's just a very safe bet to me for at least 20 here, but I think he could get obviously more. So those are the 3 running backs. They're pretty expensive, but that's just the way it's going to be. Every week I'm pretty high on those expensive running backs. And when we get to the wide receiver spot, no surprise, I'll be very cheap there at that position. Let me get some of the running backs that you're looking at here on this one.
Yeah, and we'll try to get you a little bit more affordable. Some options to save a little bit of money on the running backs. Walt's got the high end blue chippers. I've got the diamonds in the rough. Although not so rough with Jarquez Hunter. We've seen a ton of usage from him lately in competitive games, which is good to see. Auburn finally realizing what they have in him, in his talent. 28 for 130 and 3 on the ground with another 4 catches for 23 yards against Texas A&M in a back and forth battle, which is, the game to have people in. If you had the Jarquez Hunter, Noah Thomas, and Cam Coleman with Marcel Reed, you were looking pretty good. I didn't have all of those pieces in the same lineup, unfortunately, but I was on all of them individually, and that was a fun one. And we saw Bama get absolutely lit up by the Oklahoma run game. I don't know how many people were expecting that, but it happened, and I think Auburn saw that happen and is going to have no problem turning it over to Hunter 30 times in this one and letting him do his thing. And so at only 6'2", definitely in consideration, definitely a priority for me. And then dropping down even further, guy that we talked about early in the year, the question was, how is the Missouri backfield going to shake out? Is it going to be Noel? Is it going to be Carroll? And then we didn't see much from Noel. He got hurt, didn't see a lot of volume. Came back pretty strong against South Carolina, 27 for 150 and a touchdown. Had just as much volume against Mississippi State. Touchdown variance didn't go his way, with Carroll getting all 3 rushing touchdowns that went to running backs. And so pretty tough one there for Noel, pretty tough to stomach. But at only 5'1", you're getting 25 plus touches. You're probably getting 100 yards, and you got a better chance than not of having touchdown variance kind of go back your way. So if we get a 27 120 and one line at 5-1, we're all of a sudden looking pretty good. So I really like Nate Noel as a value alternative to some of those studs that you've got going to.
Good calls. All right, moving on to wide receiver. No surprise that I'll be going cheap, which I typically do. There are some good ones. There are some really, really good ones. T-Mac, Restrepo, Ja'Cory Brooks, who's done us well. Luther Burden's starting to do stuff again. Tyson, who's probably still not priced up. But I'm going to have to go cheap if I have all these pay-up running backs. And I'm going to look at Jalen Connors for Texas Tech, the tight end at 3.4K, who we know had a ton of talent coming over from ASU and really liked, hey, this Texas Tech team, they throw the ball a lot. He's going to do really well. In his first game, they had this really weird game that took them multiple overtime to beat, was it Abilene Christian? He had 563 and a touchdown. I was like, yeah, this guy's going to do really well. And then 436 and a touchdown against North Texans. Like, okay, big season in store for Conyers. And then he went for the next 6 to 7 games, pretty much invisible. Made really no sense. Taj Brooks doing his thing. Kelly's doing his thing. But usually there should have been enough passing to go around for Conyers to do something. And pretty much got written off by everyone. Week 11 against Colorado, he wakes back up, 3 catches for 50 yards, 2 touchdowns. And it's like, okay, what do we got here? And then Oklahoma State, 7 for 74 and a touchdown. 12 targets in the past 2 games. You could go to the previous 4. He had 4 targets. So, it's a little bit of a fragile play, but I think at this point, Baron Morton and what they're going to be doing in this with the offense and passing and all the points, trust Conyers at this point. And I don't know why it took them so long to really start getting in the ball, but when they do, good things happen. And he's priced at just 3.4K. This is one that shouldn't be too sneaky. I think a lot of people needing value are going to go in his direction. It could easily blank us because of what we saw, but I think at this point I'm going to trust him, and I need that value. The other play here, Jacoby George of Miami. The last couple of Miami slates, it's just been like, hey, let's play Sam Brown. He's priced cheap again at 3.5. He had 3 catches against Wake Forest, 3 catches against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech game, he was like so close to this like monolithic huge game. And he's still a fine value. But I think we really have to take note of Jacoby George, who's still priced too low at 5K. A couple of weeks ago, he was also priced at 3.9, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. We couldn't quite get there because Brown was like 3.2 and we needed near min price. But 7 for 91 and 2 touchdowns to go against Wake Forest, 7 for 88 against Georgia Tech. You look at what he's been doing targets-wise, 18 across the last 2 games with those 14 catches. He's been no lower than 4 targets in any game since week 1. So definitely one of Cam Ward's favorite targets. Has Restrepo, was looking at Arroyo a lot last week too. But George still severely underpriced at 5K. And even throughout the season, during some of his bad games, he's typically been a double-digit scorer. He had a couple of single-digit games too, right? But a lot of 5 for 59, 2 for 25 and a touchdown, which equates to 10 to 11 fantasy points. And at 5K, anything over 10 fantasy points is going to feel really good. But he scored 13 plus DK points in 4 of his last 5. Not going to sit here and say against Syracuse he's going to drop a 30 again, but I do think 15 to 16 is well within the realm of possibilities here for him at 5K. So not quite as cheap as we were last week with Brown, but I'm going to try to get to Jacoby George. Don't know if I will, but I'm going to try. And then we both have this one, so I just kind of bring it up real quick, and then you can drive home the point. But Cam Coleman of Auburn, coming into the season, high pedigree. Like, how are they going to use this guy? He's really, kind of has a bright future, youngster, and really the Auburn offense. You had mentioned they weren't using Jarquez Hunter very well early. They weren't using anything well. They have all these weapons and good players, but they just weren't functioning very well as an offensive football team. Now something's changed over the last couple of weeks, and they're running the ball more effectively, and that's opened things up a lot, especially for this future current stud, Cam Coleman, who had 8 targets against Monroe, 100 catches or 100 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then against a very difficult and tough Texas A&M team, who looked like they were going to be the SEC winner, looked like they were going to be the representative in the playoff, and then they get absolutely smacked in the mouth and get played tough by Auburn. 7 catches on 9 targets, 128 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Yes, it feels like a chase, but I have to say he has that talent. He has the pedigree. He had a ton of offers from a lot of really good schools. He's only priced at 3.9K. Game logs chasers are going to simply click him in because of what he's done, but it is so much more than that. And I know that you like him a lot too for obvious reasons. Why don't you kind of, give your 2 cents on Coleman as well?
Yeah, well, let's first talk about this game. Did Vegas just not watch either Auburn or Alabama play last week? Why is this a 2-score game in favor of Alabama in the game that Auburn gets up for more than like any other game ever? I like Auburn's won an Natty, and I think they still got up for Alabama more. Than they did. Like this is the game that Auburn upsets Alabama when they're not supposed to, and
Right.
Alabama looked terrible last week, and Auburn looked great. Like what's going on? Are we throwing the kids' college fund at the Auburn money line on this one, or you at least want to take the points? What are we doing with that?
Certainly want the points, yeah. The plus, what is it? 11.5 on DK. I don't know if I have the testicular fortitude right now to take the money line, but definitely taking the points there, most definitely, because Alabama.
Yeah.
The coaching, say what you will about the coaching staff that came in after a legend in Saban, like you just don't take that job after Nick Saban, and he may, Bama, they're still good, but man, they're going to be going through it in the off season. And you just don't lose 3 games in Alabama. And the lack of effort last week was very scary. I don't think I've seen that from a Bama team in a very long time. I don't know what to make of it. Confused.
But yeah, back to Cam Coleman. I mean, it's wild how they were just able to kind of flip a switch and say, hey, we have this really talented receiver. We have a pretty terrible quarterback, but we still got to figure out a way to get him the ball. And for him to have 15 catches in the last 2 weeks and only 30 catches on the season is just bonkers, right? But it is indicative of how much focus there is on getting him the ball. And I don't know that there's any other, sub 4K receiver on the slate that we can count on that kind of volume from. I don't know that we're going to get the same level of efficiency. That would be a little bit ridiculous to expect, but maybe Arroyo. Maybe we could expect, 7 catches from Arroyo. That'd still be a lot for him to be a season high, but we could see him do it. But at this price level, it's all the upside in the world. It would be hard to not be on Cam Coleman. And then we got to give, the bookend mention to T-Mac. Everything that has me on Fafita is basically a function of T-Mac. And if you're paying up at receiver, which because there are so many running backs, I think most people are not going to be doing, he's, for me, the end all be all. I understand the Restrepo and we like him and we've gotten him at certain points, but this is just such a T-Mac spot to me. And I'm prioritizing a way to get there. And one of the ways to get there is to use Cam Coleman.
Yeah. 37% of his targets for the season have come in the last 2 games. It's wild that Auburn could have figured this out earlier, that they have Coleman and then they have Jarquez Hunter, because as a best ball owner of Jarquez Hunter, I just didn't understand. I mean, other than the quarterback situation being trash for them, but it's wild. It's wild. They're playing the part of the early season Vanderbilt. Remember what killers they were. Now we've got late season Auburn, perhaps. Pretty wild in the SEC. All right, so looking at a core right now, and I'm going to have to probably get cheaper, but Garrett Green, Taj Brooks and Coleman for both of us, but I'll say Jalen Conyers because I need that near min price guy there, and I just need another touchdown. I need his touchdown streak to continue. So that's the core that I am looking at. But I really love this Saturday slate. What's the trio that you'll be going to war with in your primary lineup?
So I'm going to go with Fafita, and got to go cheap at running back. So we'll go Nate Noel and T-Mac at receiver.
Love it. All right. So lots of games. We'll be around in the Discord. So there'll be, articles galore for that stuff. And also, we'll be around for questions. I'll also have the Saturday morning show for Q&A stuff. So plenty of games to cipher through. It's going to be a crazy couple of days here for both sports in the collegiate world. Let's go through some props before we head out. PrizePicks, Underdog, all that stuff. I don't know if you have some loaded right now, but why don't you go ahead and kick us off if you do?
You know what? Well, you can start. My app is out on me.
Do. That's all good. Yeah, I only have a couple here. So Caleb, it's a high one, but Caleb Johnson, like he's solidifying his draft stock, right? And they're playing Nebraska later on. This is they have that evening slate. It's 132.5 rushing yards, which is a massive amount, but he's going to get 35, maybe even 40 carries against Nebraska. And he's going to hit that over. He looked like somebody who was going to set records last week, but then they took their foot off the gas. So that's the first one. Second, we're going to go with the Rocket Sanders versus Clemson game, South Carolina versus Clemson. We didn't really talk about the options in that game. This is going to be a fun one to watch, bet. And also, I think he gets a lot of volume against Clemson. That passing offense of Clemson is going to be tested by the defense, and they're going to give a lot of touches to our guy, Rocket Sanders. So over 73.5 rushing yards there for Rocket Sanders is also very high on my list. The passing and rushing here, I just want to make sure it is not changed. Riley Leonard over 259.5 pass plus rushing yards. For comparison, Garrett Greens is sitting at 285.5, which I don't mind that either. But Riley Leonard, same kind of quarterback, and if it's a close game, rushes for 80 to 100 yards, throws for 150, 200. That should be a very attainable number for him. So over 259.5 passing plus rushing yards. These are all on PrizePicks. And then the passing yards, one for tomorrow, which is the Thanksgiving game, is Tulane versus Memphis. My man, Darian Mensah, he's had an up and down season, but Tulane's winning games, and a lot of it has to do with him. They have his passing prop at 190.5. I do like him to throw for 200 plus. They lean so heavily on Micaiah Hughes, but Memphis knows that. He's going to have to sling it a little bit. So 190.5 yards. Over that number, we like it for our passing stuff. I'm going to pull up DraftKings and some betting things here if you want to take over the PrizePick stuff if you're ready.
Yeah, ready to go on that. So we'll go starting with the Friday guys. We'll go with Quinton Cooley over 92.5 rushing yards. Like him to get over 100 with ease on that one. So the 92.5 is a pretty comfortable number. Also, sticking with the rushing yards, we're going to go Dylan Sampson over 108.5. I think we can run on Vandy a great deal. Might be there by halftime kind of situation. And, we like Dylan Sampson quite a bit. His price is up there and one of many to choose from on a DFS perspective, but on PrizePicks, easier to get to that. Onto the receiving yards, talked about how much we both like Cam Coleman. He's only at 47.5 receiving yards. And, I think with the volume that he's getting should be able to blow that out of the water. They have Keandre Lambert-Smith at 62.5 and Cam Coleman at 47.5. So obviously like that a great deal. I don't yet see, maybe I missed it, but I don't yet see a T-Mac receiving line. Were you able to pull one of those?
Doesn't look like just for receiving yards.
Yep.
Nope, I don't see one.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that one. And I don't know. Do you want the over on the T-Mac receiving yards? Because I do. I don't know what. It's an interesting game. Where would they have to set it for you to not like auto over? I think it would be like one.
Well, yeah, I mean, they'll probably set it at 89. Do you think I don't know if they'll put it at 100. So, I mean, anything over 100 would probably make me think. But you got me pretty hyped for them. But I think they'll put it at like 89.5.
I think they would have to put it at like 175 for me to like.
So yeah, easy over. I think they might not even put it. They might be scared. But if they set it, they're gonna only set it at 89. I feel. So yeah, easy over.
So any T-Mac, certainly less than 100. I would say like more realistically, less than like 125. I'm like super comfortable with. I think it's a huge game coming from him.
Love it. All right, a couple of bets here that I have featured in the article and that I am also adding. Arkansas State versus Old Dominion, +4 for Arkansas State. They did us well last week. They are at home against Old Dominion, so getting 4. They're a bowl team with 7 wins. Old Dominion is not very good. Arkansas State has a pretty good running game, so I'm just that simple there. Let's pull Louisiana versus UNLM. They're on the road, but -9.5. Louisiana Monroe is just not a very good team at all. West Virginia versus Texas Tech. The total is set at 64.5, which is pretty high. But like I said, I just don't see this one not going like 50 to 48 like last week with Texas Tech. So that should be an easy, comfortable over. Baylor money line at home versus Kansas. I know Kansas just knocked Colorado off their high horse, but I like this Baylor team. I think Kansas kind of has a little bit of a hangover for that one. And then South Carolina money line against Clemson. They're +3, which would be the higher floor bet. But I think that Clemson, they played a lot of subpar teams, and that's no fault of their own. You can only play who's in front of you in your conference, right? But South Carolina has really beaten a who's who, and they've been competitive in games that they have dropped. I think that they do pull off the upset here against Clemson, and I don't know that it's really a true upset. I guess by Vegas odds it is, but I am backing South Carolina to win that game outright and feel extremely comfortable with it. And then one more, San Jose State -2.5 against Stanford. They'll have a lot more success. Stanford's on the morphine drip. They're ready for the season to be over. I think the Spartans here clear that by at least 7. So those are everything. That takes us to the final part of the show. It took you to be a relatively quick one. And it can be for any slate, any day, all day, each day. I don't care. But give us the slate breaker that's going to end all. Sounds like we have a couple. Could be T-Mac, could be Cam Coleman. Who we got? Who's our top slate breaker of the week 13?
Yeah. So as much as I want to go T-Mac, I'm actually going to do something out of the ordinary. I don't typically go quarterback, but we're holiday week. We're getting weird. We're going to go Shador for 505. And at least one of those going to Draylon Miller. So big day. Pad the numbers, pad the stats, get Shador, the media cycle that he deserves. Big day for Shador Sanders.
Yeah, and he can do it. I thought he was going to throw for 300 against Texas Tech. He threw for 291 and then 340 the week after. So definitely capable of doing so. And I said week 13, but of course I meant week 14. A lot swimming around in my brain here. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us pre-Thanksgiving and into that. Some of you on the East Coast, it is Thanksgiving now. Lots going on. You can expect articles to drop on Friday morning. Well, actually tomorrow probably for the Friday slate, and then the Saturday slate Friday morning. Jake will have his night slate breakdown as well. And then I'll be back Saturday morning for the Q&A edition for the Saturday slate, and also be answering college basketball stuff there. It's been feast week, so MTE, all those tournaments, Maui, Atlantis, Vegas, all that good stuff. There are games going on till 3 a.m. for some of you. Lots and lots of things. But most of all, appreciate you guys continuing to support us and the FTN brand. We wish you a happy Thanksgiving for that and into the holiday season. Be putting up the Christmas tree tomorrow. Man, it's crazy. Thanks to Jake, of course, as well. It's been a very fun year. Not quite done yet, but we're just about there. Green screens, window trips galore. Let's make it happen. Thanksgiving. Let's do it. Take care, guys. Bye.